Hi, this is Jade with trans-coding.com, and on today's episode we're going to go a little further into depth with CSS styles, and we're officially going to install Bootstrap today. Just a little bit further in depth means that we're going to divide our resume up into better sections so that we can prepare it for Bootstrap. We're going to also go over a couple of fonts, maybe change up the style of the page a little bit. Then we're going to install and/or link Bootstrap. There's two different ways to do that, depending on how you want to install it on your own site. Then we're going to begin creating an overall theme for our page. That'll be something that goes across all of the pages that we create. So that'll involve colors and the way that we divide things up. Next, we'll further refine the resume file itself by moving pictures around, defining how they're shaped, and maybe changing the way that some of the sections are displayed. And finally, we'll go back to our index page and begin dividing it up accordingly. So let's go ahead and get into that. So one of the first things that we're going to do on our page is, at the very top, you can see that most pages have their own icons to the left of the title. And we want to do that with our page as well. So the way that we're going to do that is by taking an icon from our page. We're going to upload that to this site, realfavicongenerator.net, and we're going to allow it to build all of the icons possible for iPhones, Android, app development, and bookmarks as an example, and we will go ahead and put that into our folders and move from there to generate it in our own web page. So the first thing we're going to do is select our own icon, and then once we've opened that, it will go ahead and load it in, and it will give us our options. So for iOS, we can choose whether to add a solid background or leave it transparent. And the same thing for Chrome. We can choose a solid background or we can leave a transparent background. And for Windows Metro, I'm not sure who uses that anymore, but we can always choose to set that up as well. And on Safari, and for the touch bar that is on some MacBook Pros, we can choose the icon for that as well. And finally, the path for the place that we're going to be putting our icons. We're going to put in here the location of where we're going to be putting them in the future. Now, I know that we haven't put in our object-oriented programming yet, but looking ahead towards the future, we're going to build a folder called public_HTML, and then inside of that, we're going to put a pictures folder. And in doing so, we're going to start looking towards the future of our website and creating an area where the public is allowed to go and where they're not allowed to go. And so this will be the first place that we actually define that folder. So I'm going to use /public_HTML/pictures, and then I'm going to click Generate Your Favicons in HTML code. And so you can see now it's generating all of the possible icons that I'll need. And then I'll just download the package, and I will unzip it. And I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste all of these into the folder. So inside of our htdocs folder, you're going to have to create a new folder called public_HTML. Then inside of that, you'll create a folder called pictures. And then inside of that folder, you'll go ahead and paste all of the icons that we just got. Now you'll note on the Favicon generator page that it says extract this package to that location, which we just did. And then we're going to insert the following code into our own page in the head sections. So we'll go ahead and copy that code, and then in the head section for our site, we'll go ahead and paste that in. And because we still have the index and resume page, we'll need to put that in both locations. And now when we refresh our page, you'll see that the icon at the top has changed. It's difficult to see that icon here because of the dark background, but if you look at the page as a bookmark, you'll see that that icon is now the T-C for trans-coding.com. Alright, next up we're going to do a font change to the page, and reasons for changing the font is to make it just a little bit more yours, a little bit different than what everyone else has. So in changing the font, we can go to fonts.google.com, where we can find a repository of about 1,000 fonts, and you can go ahead and make your choice for those fonts. There is a search here, so you can set serif or sans serif. And that's going to be whether or not they have the little ticks at the edges of the T's, the H's, ends, etc. For our site, we're going to use a font called Nunito. And here it is, and you can get a preview of it. You can look at a paragraph. You can look at the alphabet itself. You can change the pixel size and get an idea of how it's going to look. I think this one should work well. And so the way that we're going to do that, select that font by pressing the plus button. Then at the bottom, we can use this code that they've given us to import the font family. And now that we've applied that font family to this page, I'm going to have to specify where I want that applied at. And for our page, I think I want it applied from top to bottom, so the entire page. Since the entirety of our page lies only within a body tag, you can see there's nothing below the body tag here that is on our page. And the title of the page rests only in the top. That's going to be controlled by the browser, so we can't change that. Therefore, at the top, in the style sheet, I'm only going to affect the body of the page. So I'll go back here again, and I'll just take from the family selection their recommendations on the style sheet. Go ahead and put that in, and we'll take a look. And you can see that the entire font for our page has changed now. Now that we've done that, I'm going to go ahead and make a few changes just to kind of divide up the page so that when we install Bootstrap, it's a little bit easier to work with everything. So, because I've already put in my comments here for top of resume, summary section, etc., I think that's how I'm going to divide my resume. So I'm just going to do that now by adding in a div, and I'm going to give that an ID. So an ID is going to help me define the identifier for each of these later on. So I'm going to call this resume top. And that's going to be a unique name that I don't think will be used anywhere else, and that helps me define it later on. And I'll do that with the rest of the page, just adding a div to each section and giving it a descriptive ID. One other point of note with Sublime Text, instead of just typing div and tab to write out our div section, we can now start using identifiers. One of the way that we're going to identify IDs within CSS style sheets is with the hash symbol. And so I'm going to use that hash symbol here as well. So I'm going to type div, the hash symbol, and then the ID that I want to give it. That would be resume skills for this section, and then I'll just hit tab, and you can see it's going to write in the ID automatically for me. Alright, that concludes all of the changes that we're going to make, and now we're going to go ahead and install or use JavaScript to bring in Bootstrap. Alright, now we're ready to get started with Bootstrap, and that's going to allow us to get rid of a lot of this black and white and our horizontal rules, and finally start to add some more color to our page and really start dividing up and making this page look really professional. So the first thing we're going to do is head over to getbootstrap.com, and the easiest way to go from there is just to click the Get Started button. Optionally, you can click the download button, and that will download. You'll get a zip file for it. Inside of that zip file, you'll see the initial distribution, which includes the JavaScript and the CSS to run Bootstrap, and in each of those you can see each of the files required. There's no real reason to do this unless you're going to modify Bootstrap on your own and make it your own tool. For our purposes, that's really not necessary, and so we're going to follow along instead with the Get Started button from getbootstrap.com's main page. So we'll type Get Started, and then there's a quick start setup here. So it says copy and paste this link into the head before all other style sheets load for Bootstrap CSS. So we'll go ahead and do that. So on our page, in the header, before anything that says the word link relative style sheet, go ahead and copy and paste that in, and we'll do the same on our index page. And then for the JavaScript portion of it, we've got 3 lines of code to copy, and it says to place that right before the closing /body tag. So now that those are in, I've got to go ahead and refresh the page, and you'll notice that one big change did happen immediately. Our links are no longer underlined. Outside of that, none of the rest of the page has changed. And that makes sense because we haven't changed any of the styles for this page. So there are a lot of things that can be done with Bootstrap as stated. However, one of the important things to note with Bootstrap is that it does require HTML5, which we're using, and it also requires this responsive meta tag because Bootstrap has been built for mobile. And so we want to make sure that we're ready for mobile at the start of the web page. So we're going to go ahead and take this meta tag, and we're going to put that into the header on our page. So now that we're done with the documentation and importing Bootstrap into our own page, one of the other things I'd like to point out on getbootstrap.com is in this examples section, we can click on that, and if you'll notice, there's plenty of examples that they provide so that you can build things into your own site. So if I don't go over something that you'd like to build, you can come here and get examples on anything that you'd like to see. One of the great things about using examples is it shows you not only what you can do with Bootstrap, but it's going to give you the files so that you can play with it yourself. So as an example, if you wanted to use cover, it says it's a one-page template for building simple and beautiful home pages, sure, but as we click on it, you'll notice that it has a navigation bar here at the top for home features and contact. As we hover, it's going to put a line underneath the different links here. Those links don't go anywhere yet, so they're not going to activate. And the Learn More button, the same thing. It activates, but there's no link to it, so it doesn't go anywhere just yet. Now, these examples don't provide the actual text or the HTML that you would need, but again, if we inspect, we can see what HTML was used to build these. And so in the case of this container, you can see that they're using a flex and a flex column. Then the header is given a class. Then there's an inner class for that where they've set up a brand name. They've justified the content, which means it's going to be evenly spaced. And here's the nav bar that's set up inside of there. So you can copy and paste their HTML, then you can kind of figure out how it works. And if you don't understand how something works, we can look for things like a flex dash column in regards to Bootstrap and see what it comes up with. So you see when we search for flex column in Bootstrap, that gives us flex. And that's one of the utilities for Bootstrap. So you can see that gives us all of the variations for the flex box. So we can define them with these variables, and then we can set up rows in different ways, and it gives examples for each of these. And then you can use these examples to further build out your website. So that's a quick overview of Bootstrap and getbootstrap.com. Now let's go back to our website and make a couple of changes. So one of the first areas we're going to work on our page is the very top of the page. And the way that I'm going to change that up is by adding a background color and by changing the layout of the name and the email address. And I'm going to do that by laying them side by side, and I'm going to use the grid system from Bootstrap for that. So I will provide a link to this in the description if you'd like to take a look at it yourself. There are plenty of options and examples in here on ways of laying out different columns in the Bootstrap system, but the basic understanding that you'll need to know for Bootstrap is that when you set up a system, you'll need to define a row, and then once you've defined a row, you'll need to set up the columns inside of that. When you build your columns, you can have up to 12 columns inside each row. Each column can have up to 12 divisions across. So you see in this example here, we've got 4 columns across, and they're evenly spaced. That means that there would be 3 spaces taken up in this grid system by each. And in the next row, we've got a call-8 and a call-4, which means that in this row, 8 spaces are taken by the first column and 4 are taken by the second column. And you can see that these are also dynamic, so as we drag in, the columns change their sizes dynamically to the window. So we're going to use that for our page as well. So going back to the resume, first I'm going to change out the H1 and H3 tags because we're going to be defining by a column, which means we're going to be using divs of rows and columns. So looking at the way that we set this up before, the top of my resume is where we're dealing with, and this div has an ID of resume top, so that's the ID that I'm going to use to define my colors and the area that I want to work with. And I'm going to go ahead and give this a class right now of row. And now we'll go to the top and define the CSS for it. Now because this is an ID, we're going to use the hashtag for it. Remember that before when we had job image, we used dot. The dot is for a class identifier. The hash mark or the pound sign is going to be used for IDs or identifiers. So here I want to set the color. And I'm going to use the hex color to set it. And so you can see now that we've removed the CSS styling for the H1 and H3 tags. We've offset those divisions now, so the name and the email are now offset and they don't look as pretty anymore, but we'll take care of that in just a moment. But what you can see is that the background color has now been changed to this hex color. I also want to change the height just a little bit, and I'm going to force a specific size for that. So you can also define heights and widths by pixels if you know what height you want them to be. So now that I've set up the division for resume top, and I've defined that class as row, I'm going to remove the H1 and the H3 tags, and I'm going to set those up as columns. Now because I'm not worried about the device that this is attached to, I'm not going to assign them as a call dash with a number, and I'm just going to let it define the columns automatically. And now you can see with that done, the name and the email address have been spaced in their own columns, but now the font is just a little bit too small to read, so we're going to go ahead and adjust that. So one of the ways that we can define font size is with the CSS style of font-size, and you can define that by the number of pixels. One of the other ways you can define it is by an element size. So you can use a number and an REM as the tag at the end of that, and that can also be used to define sizes. And that's something that you can kind of play around with to figure out different size sets. So as you can see, as we play around with those, it changes the way that these are styled out just a little bit. Another way that we can adjust them is using classes that are set up with Bootstrap 4. So inside of the class, we can change these to say display, and then dash, and a number 1 through 4. 4 being the smaller sizes, and 1 being the largest sizes. I think unfortunately in this case that size 1 and size 4 are all going to be just a little bit too big for what we need. So I'm going to go ahead and go back and try to use a font size setup. So I think that 24 pixels will work out nicely. If you want to center the text within the columns, you can also do that. And we can set that up by using the style text-align and setting it up as center. So one of the other examples on the alignment setup here in the example of the grid on Bootstrap's page shows that you can align the rows inside of a div at the top, in the center, or at the bottom vertically. And that is simply done by changing the class to have align items start, center, or end accordingly. And so we're just going to go ahead and take that class itself, and we're going to apply that so that the columns that we have in the top of our resume are vertically aligned within that, in the center of the page. So when we refresh, you'll note that they are now right in the middle. So moving down the page, we used horizontal rules to break up each of the sections below. And I think that there may not be any reason to have those horizontal rules anymore, because as we're adding color to the page, we may be able to use color to break up these different areas as well. And so if we want to break up each of these sections, for instance the summary or computer skills, into their own specific areas, we can remove that horizontal rule and we can use a div and class of row, and we may be able to use Bootstrap and a little bit of CSS instead to change the way that those are arranged and add some color in that way. So you can see for the summary section, I went ahead and added a class of section holder and row onto this area. And then at the top, I went ahead and set a CSS class for section holder, and I added a border top of 5 pixels solid and a border color with a hexadecimal color. And so when I refresh the page, that put a solid line up above our summary. But now, because we're using Bootstrap to define this as a row, our summary is now extending beyond the page. So we're going to have to put that, instead of in paragraph tags, within div tags and define it as a column. And so you can see, simply by switching out the paragraph tags for a div class call-12, I've made it a requirement for the web page to place the summary across the entirety of the top, even using up the blank space, so that the phrase team lead in software doesn't move up to the page with it. And so now we can remove the horizontal rule, and everything should look good as is when we refresh. Alright, I think that looks good. And now I'm going to go ahead and do the same things for all of the sections going down to the bottom of the page. In the section for experience, where we had a table layout with table rows and a table header, and then we had 3 table headers with each of the names going across, we no longer need to have that table set up with Bootstrap. We can simply use 3 different columns across, and it should lay out that data very nicely in a single row. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to take out the entire table setup. And then for each of these lines, because I want them to sit on their own line, I'm going to take that number 12 for the 12 divisions across. I'm going to divide it by 3, which is going to give me the number 4. And so I'm going to set these up in a call-4 format. And you can see that gives a nice layout here across this set, and it makes sure that nothing bleeds over. We'll take care of the formatting across it in just a moment. Alright, that takes care of all of the cleanup for that. So we went ahead and we put in all of the divisions to set up the page in Bootstrap. And we made sure that all of our pictures still fit on the page nicely, and all of our tables are still listed nicely. Now you'll note that the unordered lists that we've got underneath each of these still fit on the page, so those weren't changed. Now if you'll recall, the tables that we had before that are now in these layouts, we need to make sure that those get spaced out properly. So first we're going to make sure what used to be these tables gets their bold coloring back, and then we're going to go ahead and set it up so that they've got nice even spacing on them. And one other point of note, just as an aside here, you'll note that I've got some bleed over. This community college should be on the next line, and because this major in computer science is less than the size of this next division, which is a call-4, it's bringing it up a line, and I don't want that to happen, so I'm going to force my unordered list sets to be a call-12, and that means that they will be forced to be on their own quote-unquote line. So I'm going to make that change to mine. Feel free to do the same to yours, but it's not a requirement. So previously when we worked with a paragraph, we used EM as a tag for emphasis, and now in Bootstrap we have a class for bold text, changing a weight to normal, light, or italic, and we're going to use font-weight-bold for that. So we're going to add that to each of the rows that we set aside as tables before, and give it that bold coloring again. Alright, and one of the easiest ways that we can set up making sure that these different columns line up is by giving the dates a little less space than we give the title or the location. And so I'm going to try using a column 2 for this date, and if I use 2 that means I've got 10 left to play with, so I'll try 4 for the location and then 6 for the title. And I'll see how that works. That looks like it worked pretty good for this bottom one, so I'm just going to apply that all the way up as well. Alright, given the progress that we've made on our page so far, I think that this is a really good place to take a break, review what we've done. It'll give you a chance to play around with your own page some, play with the colors, play with layouts, and the column setups. If you want to, go back to Bootstrap and look for the Flex layout and give that a try as well. I won't be going over the Flex layout in this section. I may be going over it in the nav bar in the next section that we go over. In the next episode, I will be going over the nav bar, and I will be going over some more effects on the pictures that we have on our page. I want to change the way that they look just a little bit. I want to incorporate some more pictures, and once we have those incorporations, those changes, and the nav bar in effect, we will go back and start to change our front page. And changing our front page will involve bringing in object-oriented programming. And so that will be the next steps moving forward. If you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. My name is Jade, and this has been trans-coding.com. See you next time.